Greetings, brothers and sisters. Shalom. Assalamu alaikum. Ad Naslana. Guess who I talked to last night? Right? I talked to my old friend, the Catholic Perennialist. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about this, but he talked about, last night we discussed a literary theory he's been developing about the latest 3 books of Cormac McCarthy. Again, I've saw some of the movies based on his books, but never really read his books. But he said that some of his books have significance to the origins of the craft. Now, like I said, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time kind of elaborating on what he said. I'm going to let you look at the conversation and draw your own conclusions. But after you do, like I said, I want your feedback. So let's move forward. Trim your lance, brothers and sisters. Follow me, and let's use our discernment. Catholic, welcome to Points of Light Radio.
Welcome to Points of Light Radio. That's good to see you again.
Yes. Now, you're here tonight to talk about the theory you have about the myth of Persephone. Cormac McCarthy.
The myth of Persephone. Cormac McCarthy. Yes, that's correct. Cormac McCarthy, for those who don't know, is a pretty famous 20th century author. And people have speculated for years about what his connection to the craft might be, because he writes, I wouldn't say very heavily Masonic themes, but there are certainly Masonic themes sprinkled throughout, and especially Kabbalistic themes, which any member of the Scottish Rite would understand immediately as being potentially Masonic. In his later works, I see what most people, I assume, do not see. I see an attempt at a retelling of the myth of Persephone. And this is significant because the myth of Persephone is the original, you could say, mythos of the fraternity of Eleusis, that is the Eleusinian myth. And because this is so central to fraternalism and so central to the history of fraternalism, I understand his retelling of this myth in his last 3 books over the past 15 years as a very clear connection to Masonry. Whether or not he was a member is neither here nor there. I view this as a definite connection.
Okay. Now, you've highlighted the origin of the Eleusinian mystery. You know, the myth of Persephone essentially the myth of Persephone origin of the rebirth of the sun. So let's get into that. What exactly is here?
Well, Persephone was the daughter of Demeter, and that's the Greek terms for both daughter and mother. And these were goddesses, and the consort, or the father, you could say, of Persephone was Zeus. Now, in the system, the names would be different, but the story relatively similar. It would be Ceres would be the goddess who gives birth to Proserpina, and Jupiter's the father. But Demeter and Ceres both are the goddesses of, you could say, fertility and like the goddesses of agriculture, and they're the ones that give blessing to the grain harvest. And so Persephone is kidnapped by Hades to be his consort, his queen in hell, essentially. And Demeter wanders all of Greece looking for her daughter. And while she's weeping and mourning, she's not tending to the fields. And so she withholds that fertility from the fields of ancient Greece and causes a famine. Well, this famine is the 3 months of winter. And so Hermes is sent into Hades, into hell, to retrieve Persephone. And she is permitted to leave as long as she has not eaten anything in Hades. But because she's eaten or is convinced to eat 3 pomegranate seeds, she must spend 3 months in Hades every year. And so this is an etiological myth. That is, it's a myth that attempts to explain an origin. It's an attempt to explain the origin of winter. But the assumption and the understanding is that if she were never pulled back from hell by Hermes, then the earth would be under a perpetual winter. And that was the, I guess, the single worst looming specter over the life of an ancient person is to experience famine. Because unlike war, which might affect an army or might indiscriminately kill civilians, unlike sickness, which tended to wipe out the weak, famine was universal. It was universal death. And it turned people into animals, because people experiencing famine, they would go so far as to eat their own family members. And we have many examples of this in ancient history, especially reading Josephus and some of the Old Testament, where people were reduced to cannibalism. And so this fear of famine looms large in the ancient mind, and I have to believe it goes back all the way to the Ice Age. And a little more closely in time goes back to the Bronze Age collapse, where people truly did experience these conditions. And so the rescue of Persephone is, you could say, the one core piece of temporal hope that the ancient people had, that winter was not going to be forever, that their hunger was not going to be forever, and that there would be a resurrection of the created order as soon as spring came around.
Okay. But you say it kind of ties into the idea that Hiram dies to protect the lost world of history by blows of 3 ruffians before he's interred in Acacia Planet, signifying eventual resurrection.
Yes, and so exactly. So this myth gets retold in the life of Christ, and it also gets retold in the legend of Hiram. And as with most myth, as it progresses through time, the elements will change, or I should say the specifics will change, but the core elements do not change. And so the Christ story goes all the way back to the Old Testament, where it's not Persephone that's lost, but it's Eve who is deceived by the serpent. Not Hades this time, not the devil, you could say, in the Greek sense, but the devil in the Hebraic sense, deceives her. And God said that on the day that you eat of this fruit, you will die. And so the rescue of Eve takes a lot longer in the Christ story, because it takes the span of the entire Old Testament plus part of the New, that Christ came to save his bride. Now, as Christ is spoken of by Paul as being the second Adam, the bride is actually the church, and the church becomes, you could say, the new Eve. And so Christ is descended into hell for 3 days for the purpose of rescuing his bride from hell, which is the church. And so when Paul speaks about this resurrection in Romans chapter 8, he says that the created order groans in anticipation of the resurrection of the children of God. And so it's the same picture, except now it's metaphorical. It's not a literal revival of the greenery of spring, but it's a revival unto resurrection of these fallen souls, which is the bride of Christ, which is the church. And so the church, having fallen into sin, is the new Persephone. Christ is the new Hermes, and he goes down into hell. And those 3 pomegranate seeds and the 3 months that Persephone spends in hell become the 3 days and 3 nights that Christ spends in the grave.
Okay. But
now,
sorry, go ahead.
The Hiramic legend is even further removed, but still the core elements remain. It's a little more difficult to see, but what is lost in the Hiramic legend is not the goddess, but the word. And I obviously, for those listening, I can't go into all that entails. I certainly cannot give the word of the third degree, but I can say that there is a lost word. And because of this lost word, the building of the temple cannot be completed, because Hiram was the only one who held that word. And it could not be reconstructed. It could only be substituted. And so with Hiram, you don't have a resolution, but you only have his body interred in the ground under an acacia plant. An acacia being an evergreen, it's a symbol of a future resurrection, the finding of the word and the completion of the temple. And the reason that this is a Persephonic myth, although far removed, is because the temple is a picture of the cosmos. That is, the temple, even a Masonic lodge, is a picture of the cosmos in that the sun moves within it. The three main officers of the lodge are the personification of the sun in three stages of the day. The dawn sun, the sun in the south, which is the heat of the day, and then in the east. I'm sorry, the western sun, the southern sun, and the eastern sun all have the officers of the lodge assigned to them. And so every Masonic lodge is a temple to the sun in that way. And because the temple cannot be built, it cannot be finished, because Hiram is in the grave and because the word has been lost, Masons are considered builders because they are still striving towards this goal, still trying to achieve that lost word and to finish the temple. And in the degree lectures, often called the temple made without hands. And so this would be a heavenly temple, something aspirational. But in each instance, something has been lost. The goddess has been lost, Persephone. In the Christ story, it's the church that has been lost. Eve has been deceived. And in Hiram's legend, it's the word that's been lost. But it all affects the cosmos in some way. Creation is in some way affected. And that loss needs to be rectified in order for things to be made right in this created world.
Okay. Now you said how this relates to McCarthy's road. Sort of an abstract, isn't it?
Say that one more time.
Well, it says how this relates to McCarthy's. It's like you said, there's an abstract of seeing mythos which underpins Bluesky mysteries. Christian Masonic mysteries also defines the broad strokes of the book.
Yes, exactly. So in the road, and I'll hold it up here. My view of the camera isn't quite good, so I don't know if you can see the book I'm holding up.
Okay.
But this is McCarthy's The Road. And this book he wrote, I think, in 2007. So it's been out for some time. But The Road is a post-apocalyptic story about a man and his son who are traveling through the American South. And the entire world, for this boy's entire life, because this is an event, although we're thrust into, you could say, the middle of this event. This is an event that had a beginning probably 8 to 10 years before, which we only have flashbacks to in the book. But essentially, there was some cataclysm, either an asteroid struck or there was a nuclear war that has caused a perpetual winter. And so even during the summer months of this world of the road, it's quite cold. And in the winter, it gets even colder. And no one has seen the sun for years. And no tree has survived. All the trees are standing dead. And no animal has survived. Almost all animals have become extinct. And so the world that McCarthy draws a picture of is unlike any other post-apocalyptic world I've ever seen in fiction, in that nature itself has died. And this is exactly like the fear of the ancients when they retold this myth of Persephone, that they had hope that after the 3 months that Persephone spent in hell, that there would be a resurrection of the crops of the field and of the animals of the wood, But in this book, there is no such thing. The sun remains hidden. You could say the goddess remains lost. And so his telling of this post-apocalyptic world has no resolution like the Persephonic myth. It's a lot more like Hiram's myth that leaves you without a resolution. That is, Hiram is still in the grave. The word is still lost. But he carries around this child, and neither one of them are named. So, you know, their names are not important. McCarthy often does this. He doesn't give his characters names all the time. But as they're traveling through the wasteland itself feels a lot like you could imagine hell being barren. When this dead, dry timber that is standing is struck by lightning, it bursts into flames, and there are these massive forest fires. And so the entire landscape is covered with ash. They rarely meet people, and when they do, those people have survived largely by eating other people. And so there again, it's the ancient fear that famine would drive people into madness, famine would drive people into cannibalism. And he and his son do not succumb to cannibalism because, as he tells his son, we carry light. Well, this is very Promethean. And Prometheus and Hermes have a intimate connection, although they're not the same god. Hermes and Prometheus bear many of the same attributes. And so Hermes is the god of science. Prometheus is the god of enlightenment. And so when he says we carry the fire, we carry the flame of humanity, that is, we don't succumb to animal instincts, that even though we're hungry, even though we only eat what scraps we can find from the world that came before, we do not succumb to the animalistic behaviors of the people around us. And so as he's carrying the metaphorical fire and they're traveling south, I'm assuming attempting to find warmer climate closer to the equator, they meet another man, and his name is Eli. And this harkens back to the Old Testament. Eli is part blind, just like the Eli of the Old Testament. And they strike up a conversation. And the young boy, although he's starving, wants to give this old traveler some of his canned goods that they had salvaged. And the father, by this point, is quite cynical and doesn't give food to anyone. But the boy, although he has never known any goodness or any generosity in his entire life, he's always lived in this wasteland, he nevertheless gives some of his food to this old man. And so the boy himself is this personification of human goodness that is superhuman. And in fact, in this conversation with Eli, the father says that the boy to him is more than just a boy. The boy is a god. And that's a strange thing to say, except that I believe that the boy in this sense is Persephone. That the boy represents that thing, that God which must be saved in order for humanity to retain the light. And so we don't see the rescue of this boy, but his father, at the end of the book, dies and hands him off to a man much like himself, someone who also carries the flame. And to put it briefly, it's a book about the destruction of the natural order and the hope of the resurrection of that natural order, and the idea that just at least one human being will carry humanity through this tragedy to see humanity rebuilt on the other side. And I think that's as much as a myth of Persephone as we can get in the modern world. I think the road is a very poignant example of it.
And it also has, like you say, parallel.
Correct, because what they're searching for as they move south, they're searching for the sun. And a question that's often posed to a Mason is, what do you seek? And the answer is more light. And so the sun, although the sun in this instance is essentially dead, it's hidden behind a permanent cloud cover, they are nevertheless seeking this light. And so Masonry's connection to light is strongly represented in this book by both looking for the sun and carrying the flame.
Okay. Now, you've also talked about how Persephone in McCarthy's The Passenger.
Yes. And I'll hold those books up too, because The Passenger is actually a two-part series. Passenger is the main book, and the companion book is called Stella Maris.
Okay.
So The Passenger is the one you would read if you wanted to really grasp what the story is, and Stella Maris is you could take it or leave it, but if you can read both together to really get a sense of what he's putting out. As much as he highlights in The Road the destruction of the natural order, we don't get a clear picture of who Persephone is and why her loss should be mourned. And in this book, or this series of books, The Passenger, it's quite the opposite. You get a very clear picture of who Persephone is, or who she would have been to cause such mourning by her mother Demeter, in the character of Alicia Western. Now, Alicia Western has a brother, and these are the two main characters of these books. And already we have a reference to her being a type of goddess. Alicia Western does die, and she dies by her own hand. And I'll explain the significance of that in a moment. But the title of the book, Stella Maris, is interesting because that's a reference to an asylum, a psych unit that Alicia Western goes to before she commits suicide. And Stella Maris is a name for the Virgin Mary, the Blessed Virgin of Catholicism. And Mary is very much treated as a goddess would be treated, much like the Isis of Egypt or Diana of the Ephesians, as we read in the New Testament. And so to say and to associate the name Stella Maris with Alicia Western is already on the cover of the book to assign to her such a value and such a worth that it extends beyond the human. She's already a superhuman person, a type of goddess. And as it turns out, she is a math genius, perhaps one of the smartest people living. And she's been diagnosed with autism. And what's worse, she has hallucinations. She has schizophrenia. So these burdens that she carries ultimately bring her to her end, because the only person who could understand her is her brother Bobby Western. Now, Bobby, he's very much intelligent, much like his sister, but he pursues more tactile things. He's racing cars in Italy, has a crash, wrecks, and is in a coma. They believe he's brain dead, and they ask her to pull the plug. Well, in her grief, she refuses to pull the plug and instead pulls the plug on her own life. She commits suicide. Now, Bobby, he survives this wreck, and he wakes up and he finds that his sister is dead. Now, his sister to him was worth more than anything else in the world. He adored his sister. And his devotion to his sister is not really, you could say, it is not representative of a relationship between siblings, but it is more akin to a relationship between a goddess and his adorer, a goddess and his worshiper. And I believe that Cormac McCarthy did this not to give us a literal picture of a sibling relationship, but to explain to us exactly what it would feel like for a worshiper to lose his goddess, for the goddess to finally be lost. And her loss, he grieves her loss throughout the entire book. And much like Demeter wanders throughout Greece looking for her lost Persephone, he wanders the American South and really wanders all across America, trying to find people who knew her. And he speaks to them, and he's trying to regain the memory of her because he feels the memory of her slipping away. And he's afraid that with his own death, that all memory of her will be lost forever. So the fear is that the Persephonic goddess is going to be lost forever. What is less of a feature in this book is the destruction of the world, as it was in The Road, that was in the forefront. Here it's in the background, and it comes in through their mutual father. Their father, although this is fictional, their father in the book worked on the atomic bomb. And so kind of cracked open the gates to the potential destruction of the world. And this was seen as inevitable, that once the atom was split, mankind was going to move inevitably to the point where he'd have the power to destroy the world, and eventually it would happen. Now, that's never explicitly stated as certain. But I think it was on page 324, and I'll just read this short passage. It talked about God's looming judgment, about how eventually God's judgment was going to come, and that, in fact, by this point in time, it was past due. It says, and what Bobby Western is doing, he's speaking to one of the old asylum mates, you could say, one of the old acquaintances of Alicia Western as she spent time at the Stella Maris mental institution. He says, I don't, this is the old man, the crazy old man talking. He says, I don't believe anything about God. I just believe in God. Kant had it right, that the stars above and the truth is within. The last light the non-believer will see will not be the dimming of the sun. It will be the dimming of God. Everyone is born with the faculty to see the miraculous. You have come to choose not to. You think his patience is infinite? I think we're probably almost there. I think the odds are that we'll still be here to see him wet his thumb and lean over and unscrew the sun. And so there again is a reference to the sun that God's judgment is looming, that the natural order will be destroyed. And it's repeated throughout the book that this could possibly come through the weapons that Alicia and Bobby's father made during the 40s, or helped to make during the 40s. And these themes and these thoughts run so deeply and so consistently through McCarthy that I have to believe that he understood thoroughly the myth of Persephone and understood it as central, and you could say that the core myth of the Western world. So much so that he named both Alicia and Bobby. He gave them the last name Western, because I think this destruction, this judgment of God long past due, I think is aimed at the Western world as being the inventors of such weapons that could destroy the world.
Okay. But you believe it can be concluded that what McCarthy attempted in his final novel of a core myth of humanity.
Yes, so there are some other books that he's written. So he wrote Blood Meridian, and Blood Meridian has a lot of esoteric features to it that indicate he understood the Kabbalah very well. So he was an initiate of some sort. And he also wrote a play called The Stonemason. So there are these clues that he was an initiate, but whether he was just a student of Masonry from afar or an actual member, I can't determine that. But his understanding of mythology concurred very well with the deepest of the Masonic authors, Pike in particular.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, because I have heard it speculated about even in Hollywood and Stanley Kubrick, where the orange was very much had a lot of Masonic symbolism.
Yes, and so as you know, and you provide a lot of this information on your channel, there are other fraternal bodies that carry many of the same themes. And you don't have to be a member of the Masonic fraternity to understand Kabbalah. Stanley Kubrick, he understood quite a bit that I would recognize as Masonic, but I can't say that he was a Mason. Oh. But he doesn't need to be in that sense. He doesn't need to be, because the themes are essentially, they run concurrent with the Hermetic tradition. And the Hermetic tradition comes out of Egypt, and so much of Masonry symbolism is Egyptian. And so all of these schools, they kind of branched out from, you could say, the late Renaissance, 17th century, gives birth to all these institutions and organizations, Masonry just being one of them in 1717. But they have a very long existence. And if we go back far enough, we can go back to the fraternities of Mithra and Eleusis, and even the Christian church as it began as something of a fraternity, a very secret society that you didn't want your membership to be made known to be made known publicly for your own personal safety. But at the core of all of these is a central myth, and that myth tends to mimic the myth of Persephone. Either it actually is in the case of Eleusis, or it, in the case of Christianity, is solidly built on the myth of Persephone. But I think that the most modern retelling is Cormac McCarthy's two latest works. Now he's died since then. He died in 2023, so we're not going to get any more works from him. But his two last works, if we consider The Passenger to be a 2-volume work, The Road and The Passenger are a retelling of the myth of Persephone. It's not very explicit, and that's why it's good writing, is that he lets you tease it out.
Mm-hmm.
And as an author, he never really would explain anything. He explained almost nothing to his audience. You really do have to read it and tease out the meaning, and it really helps to have a background in this material. He himself was highly educated and highly intelligent. And so reading this, I cannot come to any other conclusion that he was very much an initiate of some fraternal order, if not officially, then at least from a distance by study. And what he was attempting to retell was the myth of Persephone, which was the subject matter of the fraternity of Eleusis.
Are you working on any other theories lately?
Not lately. I've been so busy. Even to write up the outline that I gave you took 2 nights. I go through seasons of life, and this has just been a really busy one. Summers typically are.
I hear you. Well, I appreciate you taking time out of that. And all the best to you. And we look forward to having you back.
All right. I really enjoyed it. You have a good night.
Bye-bye. Wasn't it great having him back here? Right. And I love hearing his theories on different things. You saw him here in at least 4 different segments of Points of Light Radio over the years, talking about his theories and explaining some of these things that God has laid on his heart. Right. In this case, as you heard me say to him, I've heard that one of my favorite all-time movie, Clockwork Orange. I mean, this is why I kind of can understand where he got from reading these books, his theories on, for instance, The Road and so on. And I've actually saw that movie. I will say that. The other one he talked of, The Passenger, I didn't quite get a look at it. But I want to have a look at that one. But you heard me talk about like I said, my favorite all-time movie, A Clockwork Orange. You cannot help but notice some of the Masonic symbolism throughout it. So I don't doubt that what he said here today is true. Right? This was more than just symbolism. This is where some of the allegorical references were within the run. And I can see, after watching The Road, I could see where he drew some of those comparisons to Persephone and, of course, to the Hiram and so on. So I do understand that. And to be fair, as he said, one would not necessarily have, especially in this day and age, one would not have to necessarily be a Freemason to draw these to come up with these sorts of references within your work, in movies and books and so on, right? I've also heard, correct me if I'm wrong, that there are even Masonic references. Not a fan of the Hunger Games myself, so I've never really watched it or read the books and so on, but I've heard there are Masonic references there. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. But I love this, so I'm going to leave you to draw your own conclusions on this, and I do want to see your input, not just about what he said. I want your opinion on other movies or books that you might have read that might have had these sorts of references within them. All right? Before I go, as always, I want to draw your attention to the PayPal link in the details section of this segment. You can hit on that link, make a voluntary donation to Points of Light Radio. None of what you see here is sponsor driven. This is all, right? This is all done like without a sponsor. And we will use that donation to move Points of Light Radio forward. You can follow my podcast on my Points of Light Facebook page at facebook.com/Points of Light Radio. My X handle is at PO Light Radio. My Bluesky handle is at polightradio.bsky.social. You can see the link to my Spotify channel as well as my Points of Light Radio store. Brothers and sisters, remember that nothing is quite as it seems out there today. And until we meet again, just step into the light.